Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 191, The Magical Uses of Perfume. After discussing the relevant matters, a deacon from the Lateran temple came over and reported to Julius II that the bishop from the Fulda bishopric on the edge of the Duchy of Saxony came to meet the Pope. The Fulda bishopric was just an ordinary bishopric, and naturally had no right to receive an invitation from the Holy See to the ceremony. However, after hearing that the new Pope had ascended the throne, Bishop Fulda rushed to Rome without stopping to meet the new Pope. After all, that was the boss of his boss. However, it was still a day late and missed the coronation ceremony. Julius II said he knew, and asked the deacon to take Bishop Fulda to the reception room to wait, and he would wait a while before going over. After all, he was the general boss of the Catholic group, and the Fulda bishopric was a regional manager, not worthy of his attention, so it didn't matter if he waited for a while. When the deacon left, Marin couldn't help sneezing. Julius II asked hurriedly, "What's wrong? Have you caught a cold?" The word cold was taught to him by Marin when he was a guest in East Frisia. Marin also attached great importance to the health of his father-in-law, the Pope, and specially selected two highly skilled Mongolian doctors from the group of court doctors from the Golden Horde as Julius II's specialist doctors, so that Julius II would not be killed by the superstitious doctors of the Vatican. With the two Mongolian doctors, Marin estimated that his father-in-law should be able to live a few more years. "No, it's just that the deacon just now smelled of pepper. My nose is a little allergic to pepper." "Oh, Deacon Kelly likes to put pepper-scented perfume on his body, so he smells of pepper." Julius II was probably familiar with the deacon and introduced him casually. No wonder, if he was not a familiar deacon, Julius II would not dare to keep him by his side. What if he was assassinated? Pepper-scented perfume? Marin was completely shocked. Marin had heard of lavender-scented perfumes, rose-scented perfumes, and fruit-scented perfumes. But, damn, pepper-scented perfumes, I've never heard of them. What a fuss. Every spice can be made into perfume. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, etc. can all be extracted with essential oils to make perfume. In the Vatican, all priests must wear perfume, otherwise it would be disrespectful. Julius II gave Marin a science lesson with contempt. Indeed, the archbishops of the Vatican don't like to take a bath because of their religious beliefs. If you don't put on some perfume, won't your body stink? A group of cardinals have a meeting together. If everyone stinks, what dignity do they have? Isn't it almost the same as the beggars in the beggars' gang holding a meeting? Therefore, the priests of the Vatican will choose to apply perfume on their bodies to cover up the odor. Over time, this became a routine. If the missionary didn't touch the perfume, it would be disrespectful. Marin then noticed that his father-in-law seemed to have applied lavender perfume. But Julius II was different from other bishops. During his stay in East Frisia, under Marin's bewitching, he had become accustomed to taking hot baths, and no longer insisted on not taking a bath for a long time like some stubborn old bishops. The main reason was that Julius II, who was still Archbishop of Rovere, would not let Marin hold his grandson, Little Caesar, if he didn't take a bath. Later, over time, Julius II also got used to taking a bath. However, after returning to the Vatican, Julius II would not persuade others to fall in love with hot baths. Because not taking a bath has always been advocated by the Vatican. As the Pope, he cannot advocate the opposite of the previous thing all at once. Therefore, Julius II could only take a bath secretly by himself. It was none of his business whether other people took a bath or not. But even after taking a bath, Julius II still put on some lavender perfume to cater to the public and avoid being disrespectful. "So, all the thousands of priests in Rome wear perfume?" Marin asked in surprise. Of course, everyone in the Vatican wears perfume, and when holding ceremonies, incense is burned in the hall. It can be said that Rome is the city with the highest consumption of perfume and spices in Europe. Julius II continued to popularize science to his son-in-law. "Perfume. Perfume. Then, Your Holiness. There must be many perfume makers in Rome?" Marin's eyes flashed, and I don't know what he thought of. "Of course, most of the best perfume masters in Europe are in Rome," Julius II said proudly. Of course, he didn't brag. Before the emergence of cologne in the 18th century, Italy was indeed the most developed region in the European perfume industry and the region with the highest consumption of perfume. Even Giovanni Maria Farina, the craftsman who created cologne perfume in Cologne, Germany in 1709, was a perfume craftsman from Italy. In this era, the best perfume craftsmen were indeed in Italy. As for France, it had to stand aside at this time. One thing that needs to be popularized is that both the famous French perfume and French cuisine were brought by Catherine de' Medici of the Medici family, who married King Henry II of France in 1533. The first perfume shop in Paris was also supported by the Italian perfume blenders brought by Catherine de' Medici. The famous French cuisine was actually driven by several Italian chefs who were brought as a dowry by Catherine de' Medici. Therefore, if you want to brag to a beautiful woman about French perfume and French cuisine, it is very low if you don't know this. Catherine de' Medici is clearly the founder of French perfume and French cuisine. Your Holiness, can you give me dozens of perfume craftsmen? Suddenly, Marin changed his face and fawned around Julius II, asking for perfume craftsmen. What do you want perfume craftsmen for? Julius II was a little confused. I plan to open up trade routes with China in the future, and plan to use perfume as the main product. Marin whispered to Julius II. There is no perfume in China. Julius II was a little unconvinced. Is perfume a rare thing? Yes, but they are all crude goods. Marin was right. The Ming dynasty also had perfumes, most of which were low-quality Middle Eastern perfumes passed from Persia and Arabia. These perfumes are not concentrated enough, and because of the lack of distillation technology, they are not blended with high-concentration alcohol, resulting in very average quality, at most the level of later floral water. Moreover, even such shabby Middle Eastern perfumes of the floral water level are in short supply in the Ming dynasty and cannot be bought at all. So you want to? That's right, if you give me a group of top perfume craftsmen to blend top perfumes and sell them in China, I won't worry about not being able to exchange them for exquisite silk and porcelain. Marin said with shining eyes, as if he saw gold and silver coins rolling in like a mountain torrent. Can't you use other goods to exchange for silk and porcelain? Julius II was a little confused. Boss. Master. You don't know, the Ming Empire over there in China has no shortage of supplies, and the prices of everything are several times cheaper than in Europe. You want me to pull supplies to trade? Isn't that a loss? Marin said speechlessly. Is that so? Julius II was a little surprised. At that time, Europeans only knew about China through Marco Polo's, The Travels of Marco Polo. No one had ever been to China and knew nothing about the situation there. However, The Travels of Marco Polo is a boastful novel with many serious inaccuracies. It cannot be used as a reference book, but only as a children's book. Well, you know, I do have a teacher named Einstein, who really went to China. He said that the prices there are generally only a few % of those in Europe. After the price revolution, it will become 1/10 or 1/10. Ah. Then going there to trade, wouldn't it be a big profit? Julius II said in surprise. Of course, please keep your voice down and don't let others know. Remember to leave the trade rights of China to me in the future. Leaving it to me means leaving it to Caesar, your grandson. Okay, I'll leave it to you. When Spain and Portugal renegotiate the treaty, I will find a way to deliberately remove China from their partition agreement and keep it for you. However, you must have enough strength to protect such a big interest at that time, so as not to be torn apart by others. Perfume craftsmen, I will find dozens of them for you when I have nothing to do. Julius II took a deep look at his son-in-law, and went to meet Bishop Fulda. In fact, what Marin said about using perfume to trade with the Ming dynasty was just one of the uses. Marin hasn't mentioned another function of perfume yet. The floral water mentioned before is actually a weakened version of perfume. The fragrance content of perfume is about 15%-25%, while the fragrance content of floral water is only about 3%. If you can make perfume, making floral water is naturally a piece of cake. Perfume can be used for trade with the Ming dynasty. However, that will take a long time, until the Ming dynasty route is opened. Floral water, however, is urgently needed now. Because, Marin remembered that in his previous life, many parents often applied floral water to their children to prevent mosquito bites in order to prevent their children from being bitten by mosquitoes. The famous, baby gold water, floral water is said to be made from the liquid soaked in wild chrysanthemums. Marin estimated that the ingredients of this wild chrysanthemum water are somewhat similar to those of pyrethrum, and can achieve the purpose of repelling mosquitoes. If perfume craftsmen were used to soak the chrysanthemums of pyrethrum, extract the insecticidal ingredients, and mix them into floral water, then this floral water would be extremely effective when used in tropical colonies. Pyrethrum ingredients are not toxic to humans, but mosquitoes will die if they touch them, so they dare not touch them and will faint when they smell the smell. If floral water is made from pyrethrum, then when colonizing in tropical areas, colonists will not be bitten by tropical poisonous mosquitoes, which will lead to malignant diseases such as yellow fever. Previously, Marin's idea of planting wormwood and pyrethrum to repel mosquitoes was not perfect. Because there will always be mosquitoes that bypass the defense line of wormwood and pyrethrum and bite some unlucky person. As long as this unlucky person happens to be bitten by a poisonous mosquito, there is a great possibility that he will die of serious diseases such as yellow fever. However, if you apply mosquito-repellent floral water on your body, mosquitoes will not be able to attack, and they will not even dare to approach. In this way, Marin can safely immigrate to Cuba and Panama on a large scale and develop without worrying about large-scale deaths. Of course, the premise is that there is enough mosquito-repellent floral water. Moreover, Marin knows that wormwood also has the effect of repelling mosquitoes and is non-toxic. If pyrethrum floral water should be used with caution for babies, then floral water made of wormwood is much safer. Therefore, Marin needs a group of perfume craftsmen to develop floral water containing pyrethrum or wormwood ingredients to supply the needs of tropical colonies and avoid large-scale deaths. After all, tropical poisonous mosquitoes are really terrifying. Thinking of the tens of thousands of people who died from poisonous insect bites during the construction of the Panama Canal, Marin was terrified. However, if there is mosquito-repellent floral water, Marin's road to conquering tropical areas will become a smooth road. And countries that do not master this artifact will die a lot in tropical colonies. Chapter 192 The possibility of going to the East for missionary purposes. After meeting with Bishop Fulda, Julius II remembered a very important question and called Marin away alone for a secret talk. Marin, you just said that your teacher Einstein really went to the East. Yes, he really went to the East, and told me everything he saw and heard in the East. Marin said seriously. So, what do you think about us sending people to the Ming Empire to preach? Julius II looked hopeful. For a man like him who became the Pope, is there anything more important than preaching? Not very good. Marin said affirmatively. As a top student in the history department, Marin knew very well that the early spread of Catholicism during the Ming dynasty was a failure. Why? Julius II asked puzzledly. In his eyes, the glory of God should cover the whole world. There are three major problems, which are very important. If they are not solved, I don't recommend going to the Ming Empire to preach. Marin said very much. Which three major problems? Julius II asked with interest. First, in the Ming Empire, the imperial power is supreme, and no power above the imperial power is allowed to appear. If Catholics want to go to the Ming Empire, they must first submit to the imperial power, otherwise they can't spread. This is also the most fundamental one. In the early days, Catholic missionaries suffered enough from this and were expelled many times because those fools believed that the imperial power should not interfere with the divine power. This is impossible. How can the servants of God accept the leadership of secular forces? Julius II was immediately dissatisfied. In Europe, even the emperor had to be respectful when seeing him, and the priests were also above the secular world. How could they succumb to the imperial power? This is the case in the Ming Empire, my father-in-law. Europe is Europe, and Asia is Asia. Don't use European habits to ask Asians, otherwise, missionary work will definitely fail. Do servants of God have to serve mortal monarchs? Julius II was angry. If you don't succumb to the imperial power, your missionaries will be killed in the Ming Empire. Marin said affirmatively. How dare they? Just because they have millions of troops. Marin said lightly. During this period, the Ming dynasty was still in its heyday. What's more, there were great gods such as Wang Yangming in the country, and no one could stand up to the powerful Ming dynasty. Even in the weak period of the late Ming dynasty, the Dutch did not get any good results. Julius II was silent. After thinking for a long time, he asked, what about the other two major issues? The issue of ancestor worship. Catholics are only allowed to worship gods, not other things. However, Orientals emphasize ancestor worship and worship of ancestors. If missionaries prohibit them from worshipping ancestors, the government will directly arrest the missionaries. This is a real case that happened during the Ming dynasty. Julius II was silent for a while, and said, what about the third point? The third point cannot be brought to the table, but it is very important. Specifically, Catholicism only allows monogamy. And in the Ming Empire, from the emperor to the common people, many people have multiple wives. This is unreasonable. How can they indulge their lust so much? If you object to them marrying multiple wives, even if you are the Pope, those people will not hesitate to kill you. Marin said affirmatively. Julius II choked for a moment, and he also felt that things were much more complicated than he thought. Apart from anything else, these three problems are in serious conflict with the doctrine. And Marin also said that once these three rules are violated, the Eastern court will not hesitate to raise the butcher knife. By the way, regarding the first point, I have another addition. Marin said as if he remembered something. What to add? The Catholic doctrine says, under God, all men are equal. Don't ever say this in the Ming Empire. Why? The Eastern Empire is a country with a strict hierarchy. It is impossible for everyone to be equal. The doctrine says, all men are equal, which is equivalent to touching the bottom line of the Eastern court and violating the principle of imperial supremacy. Missionaries who preach, under God, all men are equal, in the East will be expelled or imprisoned at best, and beheaded at worst. Julius II took a breath and said, are Eastern countries so terrifying and dark? It's not that terrifying and dark, it's just that the rules there are different from ours. Then you mean, it's not suitable to preach in the Ming Empire? Yes, it's not very suitable. Unless you are willing to make adjustments. How to make adjustments? First, respect the imperial power in the Eastern hierarchy, and never mention, under God, all men are equal. Julius II's face turned ugly, which was tantamount to giving up basic doctrines. Second, allow believers to worship their ancestors and maintain certain traditional customs. Julius II's face became even uglier. Third, allow polygamy. Stop talking. I will never agree to such a compromise. Julius II roared. How can this be a compromise? It is clearly a revision of the basic doctrine. If you don't compromise, don't go to preach, otherwise, all your missionaries will become wanted criminals of the Ming Empire court. What you said must be false, you are lying to me, right? Julius II asked hopefully. How he hoped that Marin's words were all lies to him. No, every word is true. There is no adulteration. Oh, no. Am I just going to watch tens of millions of people unable to bathe in the glory of God? Julius II was a little painful. No, not tens of millions, but 110 million people. Marin kindly reminded. Then, Julius II was even more miserable. There was no other way. Although there were many Christians in the country in later generations, it was because the feudal hierarchy in the country was completely eliminated after the revolution. Moreover, monogamy was also stipulated in the law. In this way, two of the three major problems were solved. As for the issue of ancestor worship, later generations also regarded it as a form and no longer took it seriously. Therefore, there was a foundation for the spread of Christianity. In ancient times, during the feudal dynasty, it was impossible for Catholicism to spread successfully in China. At most, a small number of people could be fooled. And most of the ruling class would not accept it. As for the southern Ming emperor's belief in religion and history, he was forced to convert to Catholicism. The principle of monogamy alone would make the Eastern ruling class explode. Promoting equality for all, again, is definitely asking for trouble. Therefore, during the rule of the Chinese feudal dynasty, Catholicism was destined to only fool a small number of people. As for the missionaries who entered the palace during the Qing dynasty, it was because the Qing emperors regarded those missionaries as foreign monks and rare things. To put it bluntly, those missionaries who entered the palace were all pets raised by the emperor. The emperor used their knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and painting, but after using them, he would never officially support their missionary work and only allowed them to do it privately. Marin's words dealt a huge blow to Julius II. However, Julius II still decided that one day, after Marin opened up the route to the Ming Empire, he would bring a few missionaries from the Vatican to the Ming Empire to see it with his own eyes and try it out. Otherwise, he would never be reconciled. In fact, what Marin said was a bit absolute. There were also successful missionaries during the Ming dynasty. However, those successful missionaries deliberately ignored the above three major problems and deliberately avoided cultural conflicts, which resulted in certain gains. Some even wore Confucian clothes and pretended to be Confucian scholars, such as Matteo Ricci, to establish a good relationship with Chinese literati. However, such missionary work actually violated the original intention of Catholicism and was of little significance. Moreover, Marin knew that his father-in-law, Julius II, was a famous Pope of war and a tough man. Julius II was obviously unwilling to compromise against the doctrine. Therefore, Marin was not optimistic about the missionary work in the Ming Empire. Chapter 193, Mediterranean. While Marin continued to stay in Rome, the captains and sailors who Marin had arranged to take over the galleys and rowing slaves in Venice had already arrived in Venice by land and set sail. The leader was Art, who had been on the Venice route, transported beauties to the kingdom of Naples, and had been to Egypt, and was very familiar with the situation in the Mediterranean. This time, when the Crimean Khanate route was opened, Marin gave him the task. There were no such terrible things as Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean during this period. At present, Turkey is still a landlubber and has no naval power. Therefore, it is Venice that dominates the Mediterranean. Of course, the Mediterranean west of the Italian peninsula is the world of the Spanish and Genoese fleets. And starting from Sicily to the east, the Mediterranean Sea, there is completely the world of the Republic of Venice. The Republic of Venice has 3,300 large galleys that roam the Mediterranean. Many of these galleys can be converted into warships during wartime. After all, in the Mediterranean at that time, it was still an era of jumping boats and fighting each other, and merchant ships could also be used as warships. The Turks were only on land at this time, and they could not afford to provoke Venice at sea. However, Venice also did not dare to provoke Turkey. Why? The reason is similar to the relationship between Spain and Portugal. Venice is like Portugal, strong at sea and weak on land. Turkey is like Spain, weak at sea and fierce on land. Therefore, although it can beat Turkey at sea, Venice is unwilling to provoke Turkey to avoid the Turks going crazy and attacking Venice from land. In fact, there is a reason why Venice and Turkey can live in peace at this time. Because at this time, Egypt, the main land transportation route between Europe and the East, was still under the rule of the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt. The Mamluk dynasty in Venice had a good relationship. Arab merchants transported spices from India by sea to the ports of the Red Sea, and then by land to Cairo and Alexandria in Egypt. Then, Venetian merchants came to buy spices from the Egyptians. Before the Indian route was discovered, European spices were monopolized by Venetian merchants in this way. Later, after the Portuguese discovered the Indian route, the Venetian merchants panicked. In order to fight the Portuguese, the Venetian merchants dismantled their galleys and gave them to the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt. Then, the Egyptians transported the dismantled Venetian ships to the Red Sea through the land route in the Sinai Peninsula, reassembled them, and sailed to India. They joined the Indian fleet and launched the famous Battle of Gio with the Portuguese. Unfortunately, the Venetians' guiding ideology for naval warfare was outdated, and the Portuguese had already widely used artillery. The Venetians were still immersed in the backward idea of jumping boats to help chop each other. Therefore, the Portuguese won the Battle of Gio. Of course, that still didn't happen. For now, Venice is the absolute overlord in the Mediterranean, especially in the eastern Mediterranean. The Greek island of Crete and the island of Cyprus near Turkey are also colonies controlled by Venice. Moreover, the most important thing is that Turkey has not yet conquered Egypt, and the trade route between Venice and India has not been cut off. Therefore, Venice is still quite strong now. In the eastern Mediterranean, as long as the flag of Venice is hung, you can basically walk sideways. At least, no famous force dares to touch you. As for the fearless little pirate, let's not talk about it. However, that kind of pirate only dares to attack lone merchant ships, and dare not provoke merchant ships in groups. After all, those who dare to go out on a great voyage these days are not good people, they are all people who dare to gamble their lives. In order to avoid trouble, Marin just set up a chamber of commerce in Venice, Sherlock Chamber of Commerce. In this way, Marin's galley fleet can reasonably fly the flag of Venice. Even if they encounter inspections by Venetian warships, they have legal procedures. If there is no legal proof, if you hang the Venetian flag casually, your ship will be confiscated if you are caught. Speaking of this Shylock Chamber of Commerce, it also has a history. The name Shylock, Marin borrowed the name of the Venetian profiteer in Shakespeare's play, The Merchant of Venice. After obtaining legal procedures, Arte led his men and drove 20 galleys from Venice, passing through the Adriatic Sea, through the waters of Crete and into the Aegean Sea. In the Aegean Sea, Arte's fleet was indeed inspected by the Venetian fleet. However, Arte's fleet had complete procedures and was affiliated with the Sherlock Chamber of Commerce in Venice. The Venetian fleet would naturally not make things difficult for them and let them continue to the north. However, Arte was warned that the Turks were not easy to mess with. On the way, Arte's fleet also encountered the warships of the Hospital Knights stationed in Rhodes. At this time, Rhodes was still under the control of the Hospital Knights and had not yet fallen into the hands of the Turks. Seeing that the fleet was flying the flag of Venice, the warships of the Hospital Knights were naturally unwilling to make trouble and passed by directly. After all, the Hospital Knights who defended Rhodes also needed to transport various supplies through Venice's merchant ships. If you offend Venice, the end is terrible. They just wanted to catch a few Turkish warships and attack them, and grab some supplies by the way, but they didn't want to provoke the people of Venice. After arriving at the Turkish Straits, the situation changed dramatically. Because this is already under the control of the Turks. The current naval strength of the Turks is indeed not strong, but the Turkish Straits are the lifeblood of the Turks. Even if they don't want the Mediterranean, they can't give up the Turkish Straits. Because, in the Turkish Straits, there is the current capital of the Turks, Istanbul, Constantinople. If the Turks do not control the Turkish Straits and let the enemy's warships in, then the enemy ships can directly drive to the city of Istanbul and attack the Turkish capital. Therefore, as soon as they left the Aegean Sea and entered the western section of the Turkish Straits, the Dardanelles, the fleet was surrounded by a group of small and medium-sized Turkish ships. But Art was not in a hurry. He sent people to lower the flag of Venice and raise the flag of the Crimean Khanate. What's going on? Why did the fleet on the opposite side raise the flag of Crimea? Uriman, the commander of the Turkish fleet, was very surprised. Are they deceiving us? But changing the flag right under our noses is too stupid. Uriman's adjutant didn't understand either. Never mind, send a small boat over to ask what's going on. Uriman waved his hand and sent someone to ask. After a while, the messenger brought back a parchment document written in Arabic. Uriman took a look. Oh my God, it turned out to be a document signed by the Khan of the Crimean Khanate. Uriman didn't dare to make a decision immediately, so he sent someone to use a speedboat to report the matter to the commander-in-chief of the fleet in the Turkish Strait. However, the fleet headquarters is in Istanbul, and it takes several days to go back and forth. In desperation, Art had to stay with the fleet, accept the supervision of the Turks, and wait for the reply from Istanbul. Chapter 194. Returning with a full load. While Art's fleet was sailing on the Mediterranean, Marin also returned with a lot of harvest. This time in Italy, Marin can be said to have returned with a full load. First of all, Marin got the title of Honorary Knight of Rome, which made people know that he had lent troops to the Holy See, and laid the groundwork for the later change of the bishopric of Munster. Then, through Maximilian I, he stabbed France in the back. Because, as far as Marin knew, after he met with Maximilian I arranged for the messenger to go back early the next morning, obviously to inform Ludovico Sforza, who was in exile in Switzerland. Ludovico Sforza had an average reputation in the Duchy of Milan, but the French had a worse reputation for ruling in Milan. In this comparison of who is worse than who, Ludovico Sforza won and beat the French with a relatively good reputation. If he took his troops back, there would be quite a lot of people willing to cooperate with him. At least, he would not cause the people of Milan to be angry. In fact, he also made great contributions to the prosperity of the Duchy of Milan in the past few decades. In addition, Marin also asked his father-in-law Julius II for dozens of high-level perfume blenders. As long as there are enough fragrances, these perfume blenders can make a lot of perfumes to supply market demand. In addition, you can also get some floral water to repel mosquitoes and meet the needs of tropical colonies, which is the most important thing. Grenada Island is the first tropical colony carefully selected by Marin. There are no poisonous mosquitoes and insects on this island, nor are there poisonous snakes and beasts. It is an ideal tropical colony for beginners. However, other tropical areas are different. Even relatively good areas like Cuba Island have poisonous snakes and insects. Panama is even more of a hell on earth, with poisonous insects rampant. Without the means of repelling mosquitoes and insects, the colonists will definitely be sent to deliver food. With the mosquito-repellent floral water, Marin is equivalent to opening an invincible plug-in. He is no longer afraid of tropical poisonous snakes and insects, and can colonize with confidence. If other countries want to go, many people will die. With these three great gains, when Marin left Rome, his face was full of smiles, and he couldn't stop smiling. However, there were also regrets. Julius II regretfully told Marin that although he had copied the main house of the Borgia family in Rome, he did not find the formula of the strange poison, Cantrera, but only found 10 servings of Cantrera poison. However, this poison is afraid of water, and its validity period is only 5 years. It is said that the formula of this strange poison is only in the hands of the head and heir of the Borgia family. Many of the previous poisons were prepared by Alexander VI himself, and many were prepared by Caesar Borgia. Unfortunately, Caesar Borgia escaped, and Julius II lost the opportunity to obtain the Cantrera formula. However, Julius II was an upright, god-of-war pope. Although he felt it was a pity not to get the Cantrera formula, he would not feel particularly sorry. Only Marin, a guy who is good at conspiracy, would feel regretful for not being able to get the formula. Julius II gave the task of assassinating Caesar Borgia to Marin. What he meant was that if Caesar Borgia was killed, the formula of the poison, Cantrera, that harms people would be lost. In that way, there would be no deeds of harming people with this horrible poison in the world. The reason why Julius II hated Caesar Borgia so much was not because of political hostility. It was because when Alexander VI was in power, Alexander VI and Caesar Borgia murdered a group of members of the Rovere family, causing the Rovere family to be in a period of transition. Except for Julius II himself, there was no pillar of the family. This situation caused the Rovere family to decline rapidly after the death of Julius II. After Leo X of the Medici family, who succeeded Julius II as pope, died, after the transition of the Dutch Pope Adrian VI, Clement VII, who was also from the Medici family, immediately took over and continued to dominate the papacy, bringing the Medici family to its peak. If there were still important members of the Rovere family in their prime, even if Julius II could not arrange them to be the next pope, he could arrange them to be the cardinal of the Roman College of Cardinals. With the cardinals on top, the Rovere family would not decline. Unfortunately, after the pursuit of Alexander VI and his son, the Rovere family no longer had any strong men who could do anything, leaving only some old, weak, women and children. Although there were a few little boys, Julius II knew that he could not wait until those little boys grew up and supported them to the throne. Therefore, the decline of the Rovere family was inevitable, which made Julius II hate Alexander VI and his son so much that he came up with the idea of hunting down Caesar Borgia. However, in order to unite other people in the Vatican, Julius II had to pretend to be magnanimous and pardon Caesar so that everyone could see his broad mind. At the same time, Julius II asked Marin that even if he sent someone to assassinate Caesar Borgia, he must do it 3 years later. At that time, after a long time, no one would think that it was Julius II who sent someone to do it. Anyway, the Borgia family had enemies everywhere. In the original history, Caesar Borgia did die inexplicably in a small battle in 1507. It is said that someone bribed the Spanish upper class and deliberately sold Caesar Borgia, causing him to die unclearly. Because the autumn harvest was in full swing, Marin knew that Spain would launch an attack after the autumn harvest. However, in order for Spain to quickly drive the French away, Marin specially sent his entourage with his handwritten letter to bypass the French defense line and go to Gonzalo de Córdoba. In the letter, Marin promised to lend him 10 bronze heavy artillery after returning. Of course, the Spanish army can also buy it. At the same time, Marin also gave Gonzalo a detailed introduction on how he captured the Danish city in 2 or 3 days when he was in Denmark. The French have not yet used iron gates. Using Marin's bombardment plus gunpowder barrel blasting method, it is easy to contribute to the city occupied by the French army and defeat the French army. Gonzalo de Córdoba attached great importance to Marin's letter, and soon responded positively, and expressed his willingness to wait for Marin's artillery to arrive before launching a general attack. To this end, he adjusted his tactics and planned to defeat the French army in one fell swoop in the subsequent siege battle and take over the entire kingdom of Naples. After receiving Gonzalo's positive response, Marin was very happy. As long as the Spaniards drive the French away. By then, the Florentine Republic would have become a wild child without a backer. At that time, Stade could lead 7,000 East Frisian troops to capture the Florentine Republic, and then exchange it with the Holy See for the bishopric of Munster. Chapter 195 Bishop Taylor. On the way back north, Marin received a piece of bad news that was not unexpected. Bishop Ritchie had finally died. Bishop Ritchie was also very tenacious. When Marin led his army to invade the East Frisian county in 1498, Bishop Ritchie was dying. Unexpectedly, 5 years had passed before old Ritchie really died. In other words, old Ritchie had persisted in a dying state for 5 years. Marin thought that auxiliary Bishop Taylor must be crying now. He was not sad about the death of Bishop Ritchie, but excited that he finally had the opportunity to take over. As early as a few years ago, when Marin had not yet entered the East Frisian county, auxiliary Bishop Taylor began to curry favor with the then Count of East Frisia, Edisard I, and helped him fool the people of Emden. When Marin entered the East Frisian county, he began to move closer to Marin. He jumped up and down so much, in fact, just to take over the class of Bishop Ritchie. After all, old Ritchie's health was very poor a few years ago. Unexpectedly, old Ritchie survived for several years with only a little blood left. In the past few years, Taylor, the great liar, relied on his talent for bluffing to help Marin train hundreds of little liar, and was arranged by Marin in the army in churches in various places. Unfortunately, Marin's heart is very big, and he always feels that 100 little liar are not enough, so he urged Taylor to help him train 1,000 little liar. In this way, East Frisia, including the Earldom of Oldenburg and the Duchy of Schleswig, as well as the churches in the American colonies, have priests everywhere who help Marin to bluff. However, bluffing also requires talent. If you let Zhao Dahua learn to bluff, he can learn for 10 years, but if you let Sha Zhen learn to bluff, he may never learn it in his life. Therefore, it is not that Taylor does not teach carefully, but that learning to bluff also depends on talent. Before, Taylor taught more than 300 low-level priests, but only 100 of them graduated. Even among these 100 people, some of them barely graduated. Fortunately, Marin now controls 3 countries, and there are more low-level young priests who can be sent to receive Taylor's teachings. In the future, as long as there are enough fooling priests who come out to help him sing praises while preaching every day, Marin does not believe that society will be unstable. When passing Bonn, Marin went into the city to visit Archbishop Hermann IV of Cologne. The Archbishop of Cologne is not in Cologne, but in Bonn. This time Marin visited the Archbishop of Cologne, and there were 2 main things to do. The first thing, of course, is to implement the matter of the Duchy of Schleswig joining the imperial parliament and confirming his own Duke of Schleswig. This matter is very important. This year's imperial parliament has not yet been convened, and it seems that it will not be convened until after the autumn harvest. Therefore, Marin needs support. The Archbishop of Cologne has a high prestige in northern Germany. The bishops of some bishoprics, such as the bishopric of Münster, the bishopric of Minden, the bishopric of Paderborn, the bishopric of Osnabrück, etc., completely followed the Archbishop of Cologne in the imperial parliament. Therefore, as long as the Archbishop of Cologne is dealt with, a group of votes of approval from the bishops will be obtained. For this reason, Marin prepared a lot of gifts and came to bribe. Of course, the bribery was done by other people. It was impossible for Marin to go to Rome first with the bribes and then bring them back. In fact, Marin went to Rome lightly, and the bribes to the Archbishop of Cologne were actually arranged by Cologne and later sent to Bonn. When Marin returned from Rome, Kohler's gifts had already been delivered. Hermann IV actually participated in the coronation ceremony of Julius II, but he returned home early the next morning after the ceremony. Marin, because of some things, stayed in Rome for a while and was unable to meet Hermann IV. Moreover, Marin rode a horse, while Hermann IV took a car. Although the departure time was several days different, Hermann IV actually returned to Bonn half a day earlier than Marin. After checking the generous gift sent by Marin, Hermann IV found that it was worth tens of thousands of gold coins, and he was naturally very satisfied. So, Hermann IV naturally agreed to help Marin in the imperial parliament. As for Marin's recommendation of auxiliary Bishop Taylor to replace the deceased old rich as the bishop of the East Frisian state, Hermann IV nodded and agreed directly. In fact, since the dispute over the right to appoint bishops between the emperor and the Holy See against the bishops of the bishops in the Holy Roman Empire in the early days of the Holy Roman Empire, the emperor and the Holy See finally reached a compromise and signed the Worms Religious Agreement. The agreement stipulates that the right to appoint bishops in the bishop states belongs to the Holy See. The emperor only has the right to supervise and has no right to interfere with the appointment of bishops. In addition, the secular rule of the bishops of the bishop states over the bishop states is granted by the emperor. However, as the power of the Holy See becomes stronger and stronger, the emperor's control over the bishop states is basically zero. Especially after the promulgation of the Golden Bull, the emperor's control over the Holy Roman Empire declined due to the emergence of the electoral princes. The secular power of the bishop states no longer needed to be granted by the emperor, but was decided by the Holy See. In particular, although Maximilian I was elected as the King of Germany, he was not yet considered an emperor because the Pope had not crowned him. Maximilian I had no say in how the Pope treated the bishop states. Of course, as a compromise, after the signing of the Worms Religious Agreement, the Holy See also made concessions on the right to appoint bishops in those secular principalities. For example, the opinions of the princes of the principalities were very important. If the princes opposed someone to serve as a bishop, the church should also consider it carefully. At the same time, the princes also had the right to recommend someone as a bishop. As long as the princes themselves could control the situation well, the candidates they put forward were still easy to be elected as bishops. After all, the bishops of the principalities were actually elected in their own cathedrals. After the election, it was only necessary to report to the Archbishop of Cologne and several senior archbishops for review and approval. But if the Archbishop of Cologne and other reviewing archbishops have objections, then re-election is also required. However, it is a very embarrassing thing to reject a candidate, and the general archbishop will not do it. After all, this is too offensive. Therefore, the general princes and the high-level bishops responsible for the review will reach an agreement in advance before going through the process. The Archbishop of Cologne received a lot of bribes, and knowing that Marin had a good relationship with the new pope, he would naturally not make things difficult for Marin. So, Hermann IV let Marin go back with peace of mind and arranged for Taylor to be elected. So, after Marin returned to East Frisia, he first arranged for Taylor to preside over the funeral of Old Rich, and then kept talking to the senior priests and abbots of the country, persuading them to elect Taylor as the new bishop. Faced with the strong Marin's suggestions, most of the priests naturally agreed. And those who did not agree, Marin directly planned to start. As for how to deal with them, It's very simple this year, because Pope Alexander VI took the lead, the church was generally corrupt, and many priests kept lovers and had illegitimate children. If no one exposes this kind of thing, it would be fine. If someone takes care of it, they will catch it. Of course, ordinary princes dare not offend the church. But who is Marin? He is the son-in-law of the Pope. Even if everyone does not know that Marin is the son-in-law of the Pope, they also know that Marin has a good relationship with the current Pope. The entire low-level priest, relative to the Roman Catholic Church, it is low-level. Is there still a problem? Marin has successively brought down 7 or 8 high-level priests and abbots who did not give face, which frightened the church forces in the country. Then, on the day of the election of the new bishop, Bishop Taylor was elected with an extremely high vote of 99 votes, total votes of 100. As for the only dissenting vote, Marin specially arranged someone to cast it. Why? It's too fake to be elected with a 100% high vote. Therefore, someone has to be arranged to cast a dissenting vote to show his intention. In this way, Auxiliary Bishop Taylor, who has always had a bad reputation, was successfully elected as the Archbishop of the East Frisian state with a high vote with the strong support of Marin. Chapter 196, Facing the Harvest, I Am Numb. When Taylor was elected as bishop, the autumn harvest in the county of East Frisia was coming to an end. The county of East Frisia is different from other countries. Because of the use of phosphate fertilizer and potash fertilizer, the growth cycle of rye in East Frisia is shortened, and the autumn harvest is half a month earlier than other countries, which is similar to Italy in the south. In this way, from mid-September to mid-October, the county of East Frisia completed the autumn harvest. However, the Duchy of Oldenburg and Schleswig, which are also under the control of Marin, are still in the autumn harvest. Moreover, because Marin sent troops to attack these two countries during the spring shift, the spring plowing of the two countries was inevitably affected. In addition, Marin had not yet established a fertilizer plant at that time, and the wheat in the two countries grew very poorly, and the yield might not reach the level of previous years. Of course, for Marin, these are all small things. Now he controls 3 countries. East Frisia has a population of 150,000, the county of Oldenburg has 80,000 people, and the Duchy of Schleswig has a population of about 150,000, which adds up to only 380,000 people. Even if each person eats 1 pound of rye per day, 380,000 people can only eat 138.7 million pounds of food in a year. And there are 600 million pounds of old grain in Marin's granary. Yes, 600 million pounds of old grain, all of which are accumulated from the year before last and last year. As for the grain from the year before last, it was all disposed of last year, and some was made into dark beer. The reason why Marin accumulated so much food was to cope with the shortage of food after the expansion. Because the war against Oldenburg and the Duchy of Schleswig was launched during the spring plowing period, Marin had long anticipated the shortage of food. Therefore, the 600 million pounds of food in Marin's warehouse is enough for everyone to eat for 3 or 4 years. During the autumn harvest season, Marin did not add food to the granary outside the North City, but found another place and planned to build a new food center. This is mainly because it would be too eye-catching to build the main granary in the capital Aurich. Although Marin ordered the grain to be covered when it was in and out, it could not stop everyone's curiosity. Even some foreign envoys kept asking how much grain was in the city outside the North City. So, this year's grain, Marin plans to disperse it and no longer store it in a unified manner. Before that, Marin also built a huge cement fortress warehouse on the edge of Lisle City in Lisle County, the production center, for grain storage. In addition, Marin also built a fortress on the edge of Emden City for garrisoning and storing grain. This fortress can also store tens of millions of pounds of grain. Geoffrey has already sent the statistics of this year's autumn harvest. However, Marin is no longer interested. Because this is not the first time he has faced a bumper harvest. When he just became the Baron of Texel, the first year of the bumper harvest made him excited. However, 7 or 8 years have passed, and now facing the bumper harvest, Marin has no passion at all. Facing the harvest, I am numb. Marin said. Speaking of which, as a traverser from the future, the yield of rice per mu is about 1,500 kilograms and the yield of wheat per mu is about 1,000 kilograms. Now, facing this low yield of 500 pounds per mu. In the past few years, he might have been excited because it was higher than other countries, but now, Marin really didn't feel anything. My lord, the total rye production of our East Frisian county this year has reached an unprecedented 720 million pounds. It is 30 million pounds more than last year's 690 million pounds. Fatty Geoffrey said with saliva flying and excitement on his face. As a prime minister in the 16th century, what could be more exciting than a bumper harvest? Oh, Marin responded to Geoffrey weakly in a standard, "You slump," lying on a rocking chair. Geoffrey was a little puzzled. As a monarch, shouldn't he be very excited when encountering such a bumper harvest? So he asked carefully, "My lord, why are you unhappy?" "It's not unhappy, but a little numb. By the way, Geoffrey, since I came to East Frisia, have we had a year without a bumper harvest?" Marin responded weakly, and the "you slump" posture did not change. "Well, since you took office, there has really been no bad harvest." Geoffrey thought about it, and it was true. Then, Geoffrey flattered, "Sir, you are the god of harvest. Get lost. The god of harvest is a woman, and I am a man." Marin said unhappily. Yes, in European mythology, the god of harvest is also called the goddess of harvest, named Chris. Praising Marin as the god of harvest is not calling him a woman. Knowing that he was flattering the horse's leg, Geoffrey immediately stopped mentioning it. Marin remembered something and asked, "By the way, are there many rye diseases and pests this year?" Geoffrey flipped through the report and replied, "It's still the same. Many wheat fields have some minor diseases and pests that are not very serious, such as aphids, leaf crickets, etc. The problem is not serious, but it is not small. If there were no such diseases and pests, the average yield per moo would be estimated to be 600 pounds. Is that so?" Marin thought about it and said nothing. This autumn, he has sent people to Italy to purchase pyrethrum seeds and dried flowers. If anything happens next year, take out the dried flowers in stock, mix the medicine and spray them, and all the aphids and leaf cicadas will be killed. Next year, plant more pyrethrum in the spring, and in the autumn, you can harvest a lot of dried pyrethrum flowers. By then, the amount of medicine will be sufficient. Is there any news from the county of Oldenburg and the duchy of Schleswig? Marin asked again. The county of Oldenburg is now managed by Hayter, and the duchy of Schleswig is naturally managed by former Danish Prime Minister Mikkel. However, they will still report to Auric if there is anything. And Geoffrey also accepts and reports on important events of the two countries on their behalf. They have also started the autumn harvest, but because of this year's war, the situation is not very good. It is said that about a quarter of the land in the duchy of Schleswig missed the spring plowing because of the war. The earldom of Oldenburg is better, but a lot of land has also been abandoned. Moreover, because people are in panic, the farmers in these two countries have no intention of taking care of the farmland. It is estimated that these two countries will be more difficult this year. What's sad? Take the old grain from the Auric official warehouse to help them. Marin said nonchalantly. But, that's your private grain. In Europe at this time, only nobles embezzled common property, and no nobles used their private property to subsidize public use. I am the state. Have you heard of this famous saying? The people of these two countries are now my subjects, so it's okay to give them some relief. Besides, we have too much food. There are still 200 million pounds of old grain from the year before last, so take it out to help them. Marin said arrogantly. I am the state. Which monarch said this? Geoffrey thought thoughtfully. Louis XIV. Oh no, it was said by a monarch of a small country in Asia. Marin thought about it. Louis XIV was not born yet, and his grandfather was not even a tadpole yet. So, Marin just made up a random name of a king to fool people. In this way, under Marin's order, Geoffrey took out 200 million pounds of rye from the previous year's old grain in the Auric official warehouse to supply the needs of the three countries of East Frisia, Oldenburg and Schleswig. Even though it's from the year before last, wheat can be stored for 3 to 5 years at room temperature. In addition, the granary built by Marin does a very good job of moisture proofing, so the rye from the year before last can still be eaten, and can even be used as seeds. Chapter 197 Beeswax and Cork. After dozens of perfume blenders arrived in East Frisia, Marin immediately arranged for them to start developing the best perfumes. As for the varieties, Marin first ordered the rose scent. Rose is a common flower in Europe, and it is very common in Britain and Germany. Although the flowering period has passed, many farmers still pick rose petals early and dry them for sale. What these perfume blenders have to do is to soak and steam the purchased rose petals to purify the essential oils. Then, mix them with alcohol to blend perfume. Of course, other things are also mixed. For example, add some musk, beaver or ambergris as a fixative to ensure that the fragrance does not dissipate for a long time. If no fixative is added, the perfume will soon dissipate, and it will be the level of floral water. Among the three fixatives, ambergris has the best effect, but it is too expensive. Therefore, considering the cost, Marin directly ruled out the formula of adding ambergris as a fixative. Even if such a formula is used, it can only be used as an ingredient for the top perfumes. Musk and castoreum are much cheaper, but there is a big problem with musk, which is that pregnant women cannot smell it, otherwise it is easy to cause miscarriage. Therefore, Marin finally decided to use castoreum as a fixative. After all, perfume is made for female users. Even if it is used by men, it will come into contact with women. If a pregnant woman has a miscarriage, it will ruin her reputation and even make enemies. Therefore, although castoreum is more expensive than musk, Marin still chose castoreum. At most, he can organize more fishermen to catch beavers. Even, he can consider large-scale breeding of beavers to extract castoreum. It seems that there are more beavers in Canada, and it is also suitable for large-scale breeding there. When mixing perfume, the alcohol Marin gave was medical alcohol with a concentration of more than 70%, which is much better than the spirits with an alcohol content of about 50% used by perfume blenders now. After all, Marin used multi-stage distillation to obtain such a high concentration of alcohol. Moreover, quicklime is used to absorb water. After the perfume was successfully blended, the effect was quite good, and Angela and Felice liked it very much. In fact, the reason why Marin opposed the use of musk before was that he was afraid that Felice would have a miscarriage after smelling it. After the perfume was ready, the packaging was naturally considered. Glass bottles are no problem. Before, Marin brought a group of craftsmen who could blow glass bottles from Venice and asked them to blow small glass bottles for perfume, which was no problem at all. The only trouble was the sealing problem. In this era, the sealing of European bottles was all based on corks and beeswax. First, choose a suitable cork and plug the bottle mouth tightly. Then, apply beeswax on the circle where the cork and the bottle mouth contact to completely isolate the air. During the Napoleonic War, the world's first batch of canned food was sealed in this way. However, the cans were actually heated before they were corked and sealed with beeswax. Beeswax is not a bad thing, and there is a lot of it in Europe. Long before sugarcane was introduced to Europe, Europeans who wanted to eat sweet food could only choose honey. Therefore, Europeans started beekeeping very early. Beekeeping can not only produce honey, but also produce products such as beeswax, propolis and royal jelly. Royal jelly has not attracted the attention of Europeans for a long time because of its bitter taste. Propolis is just a thing used to seal and fix the nest, and it has not attracted the attention of Europeans. However, beeswax has attracted the attention of Europeans very early and has been widely used. Moreover, beeswax is a prop used for consecration and is placed directly on the altar. Therefore, most monasteries in Europe are beekeepers. In the early Middle Ages, honey was very precious. Some poor nobles would even start a war for a few boxes of bees. Of course, they were all at the level of village chiefs, usually dozens of knights led a group of farmers with pitchforks and fought against the crowd. If the nobles had the financial resources to the level of mayors, would they care about a few boxes of bees? Even though they were both nobles, the gap was very large. Rich nobles naturally did not have to rob beehives to get honey, they could just buy it with money. Only those poor nobles who have no money to buy honey will bring thugs to rob beehives. One of the important commodities introduced by the Hanseatic League from Eastern Europe in its trade with Eastern Europe is beeswax. It seems that the labor price is cheaper in Eastern Europe. Beekeeping depends on labor costs. Moreover, there are many forests and grasslands in Eastern Europe, so there are more flowers and better conditions for beekeeping. Therefore, Marin has a wide range of sources to obtain beeswax. Moreover, when sealing, the amount of beeswax used is much less than that of cork. After all, cork needs a stopper, and the amount of beeswax used only needs to cover the surrounding part of the cork. As for corks, Marin sadly discovered that there are only 3 countries in Europe that produce cork: Portugal, Spain and France. Cork is cut from the bark of a cork tree, and it is only the layer close to the inside of the bark, which is only 2 or 3 centimeters thick. Then, the craftsman carefully removed this layer of cork skin, stacked it with other cork skins, glued it together and dried it, and then after steaming, softening and drying, they directly cut and punched it to make cork stoppers and other products. The reason why only Portugal, Spain and France produce cork stoppers is mainly because cork trees are too delicate. Cork trees are not adapted to hot climates or cold climates, but only to warm climates all year round. In other words, the place where it grows needs to be warm in winter and cool in summer. In Europe, only Portugal, which is on the Atlantic Ocean, is most suitable for this requirement. Portugal's latitude is low enough, so it is definitely not cold. In addition, the influence of the Atlantic Ocean climate makes it impossible to get hot. In this way, Portugal became the most suitable place in Europe for cork trees to grow. Later, Portugal was called the Cork Kingdom. Spain, which is at the same latitude as Portugal, also has some areas suitable for the growth of cork. This part of the area is mainly the part close to the Atlantic Ocean. The part close to the Mediterranean Sea is very hot in summer and has a Mediterranean climate, which is not very suitable for the growth of cork. Therefore, only some areas in Spain are suitable for the growth of cork. Similarly, only some mountains in the southwest of France are suitable for the growth of cork, but it cannot be compared with Portugal. At present, the amount of cork used in Europe is not small, but not large. But Marin knows that he will definitely need a lot of cork in the future. Not to mention that all these perfume bottles need corks, those glass bottles for beer also need a lot of corks. Even those barrels and oak barrels used by sailors to store fresh water also need corks. This is still the current situation. In the future, Marin may need to take out the big killer, the mini rifle. And the mini bullets of the mini rifle also need corks. Those canned bottles also need corks. Even the blooming shells with wooden butts also need corks as butts, and the butts are so large that a lot of cork is consumed. Therefore, in the future, Marin's demand for cork is very large. However, the Portuguese have not yet realized that the demand for cork will increase greatly in the future, and they are not very concerned about the development and utilization of cork trees. Many cork trees are still idle in the mountains. Marin has thought about transplanting cork trees to other areas, but it takes 10 years from planting to peeling cork trees. Marin obviously can't wait that long. Moreover, it is not easy to find a place with a climate similar to Portugal's warm winter and cool summer. So, Marin can only turn his attention to Portugal. However, because of the great voyages, Marin and Portugal have a grudge. If Marin's men go to Portugal to purchase cork in Marin's name, they may be broken-legged and sent back by the Portuguese. Not to mention letting Marin's men get their hands on the cork trees in the Portuguese mountains. To this end, after much deliberation, Marin had to entrust merchants from other countries to go to Portugal to run the cork industry and find more cork trees. Then, he would buy the goods from them. Chapter 198 I, Lu Hansan, am back again, Part 1, in Graubünden, Switzerland. Maximilian I immediately returned north after attending the coronation ceremony of Julius II. In Ch, the capital of Graubünden, he found Ludovico Sforza, who had been unemployed for a long time. Of course, Ludovico Sforza was not on vacation in Ch. Although he brought both of his sons to the city of Ch for resettlement, his camp was still in the Tellina Valley on the Italian side of the south of the Muster Valley. In the Tellina Valley, Ludovico Sforza used the local stone resources to build a solid stone defense line and several stone fortresses, which were followed by 3,000 or 4,000 men. The French really wanted to destroy them, but the Tellina Valley and the Muster Valley were the kind of one man guarding the pass and 10,000 men unable to open it. Although there were only 3,000 or 4,000 Italian mercenaries, it was not a problem to block tens of thousands of French troops with the help of the strong passes. Moreover, due to the conflicts and changes in the Swiss region, Ludovico Sforza did not hire Swiss mercenaries to recapture Milan, which also avoided the tragedy of Swiss people do not fight Swiss people. However, in the past 2 or 3 years, because of the lack of financial income, the money brought by Ludovico Sforza has been a little tight. However, because Marin made a big move in northern Europe and led his army to directly break through the Danish capital Copenhagen, Marin's general Fronsberg also became popular. Before, Fronsberg was also valued by Maximilian I, but because of his lack of qualifications and youth, Fronsberg was quite excluded under the emperor. But with the news that Marin led his army to sweep across Denmark, a powerful country in northern Europe, there was no longer any doubt in the emperor's army about Marin's military system. In particular, in the south, the Spaniards also used the Marin phalanx to defeat the 40,000 French army with 20,000 Spanish troops. Even Gonzalo's victory over 40,000 French troops with the Marin phalanx at the head of 20,000 Spanish troops was more convincing than Marin's success in northern Europe. Because Marin's battle in Denmark was a siege, while the Spanish defeated the French by fighting head-on. Therefore, Fronsberg, who mastered the full set of Marin phalanx, became a hot commodity all of a sudden. The emperor summoned him several times, and the generals came to ask him for advice. Among those who asked for advice, Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, was the most honorable and the most eager. Because the Spaniards defeated the French with the Marin phalanx, who made Ludovico Sforza hate them so much. For this reason, before Maximilian I returned from Rome, Ludovico Sforza stayed in Ch and pestered Fronsberg to learn the Marin phalanx. Old Lou fantasized that one day he would lead the Milanese army and beat the French to the point that they could not take care of themselves. After Maximilian I arrived in Ch, he immediately summoned Ludovico Sforza and told him about Marin's inference. Suddenly, Old Lou was excited. "Your Majesty, are you saying that my chance to counterattack has come?" Yes, the French have pulled their main forces to the Kingdom of Naples to fight the Spaniards. At this time, the Duchy of Milan should be empty. If you attack, you should have a great chance. That's great, I dream of returning to Milan. Now the autumn harvest has just begun, I suggest you launch an attack when the autumn harvest is just completed. Maximilian I said after thinking about it. Why? Old Lou was a little confused, he couldn't wait any longer. If you go too early, the autumn harvest of the Duchy of Milan will be affected. If you go too late, the harvested grain will probably be transported to the Kingdom of Naples to supply the French army. This time, your mission is to seize the autumn harvest of the Duchy of Milan. After the autumn harvest, the French will definitely collect grain to the front line of the Kingdom of Naples. You know, because of the war this year, food production in Naples has stopped, and more than 30,000 French troops are waiting for the food supply from the Duchy of Milan. If you seize the Duchy of Milan before the food is transported to the front line, then the food supply of the French army will be cut off, their morale will be affected, and it will be easy to lose to the Spaniards. Moreover, you who intercept the food will become rich all of a sudden. Maximilian I described a beautiful prospect to Ludovico Sforza, and it was a real beautiful prospect. You know, under Ludovico Sforza's painstaking management, the people of Milan built water conservancy projects, and with its excellent geographical location in the Lombardy plain, Milan became an important grain-producing area in Italy within a few decades. Of course, this also aroused the covetousness of the French, causing Ludovico Sforza to lose the Duchy of Milan. It was really, blessings and disasters go hand in hand. Today, the French army, which is fighting against the Spanish army on the front line of the Kingdom of Naples, relies on the grain output of the Duchy of Milan and the industrial and commercial taxes of Milan. If the Duchy of Milan is taken back by Ludovico Sforza, then the French army will be miserable. Because this means that the supply of more than 30,000 French troops will rely on the supply and support of the mainland. Therefore, Marin encouraged the emperor to support Lao Lu to return to Milan in order to cut off the French army's land logistics supply line. Coupled with the Spanish tactical lead, the French army must be defeated. Moreover, this defeat will be a collapse. Counting Stade's attack on Florence, at that time, once the French army is defeated, they can neither retreat to Florence nor to Milan. They have no way back and can only flee westward to their homeland. On this way, because of the lack of supplies, you can imagine their difficulties. By then, the number of French troops retreating will be less and less, and I wonder how many people will be able to return home. Maximilian I is not a fool, but a powerful politician and military strategist. Therefore, after being encouraged by Marin, he thought about it and agreed. Because he was very happy to see the French people in trouble. Moreover, because it was the autumn harvest season, once Ludovico Sforza took over Milan, he would just harvest a lot of food. With so much food, and Milan has always been a rich city. At that time, Ludovico Sforza would be able to survive well without his own support. Then, Milan became a barrier to the empire, a barrier to prevent the expansion of the French. However, because the money and food were almost spent, and the number of troops under his command was insufficient, Ludovico Sforza had no confidence in the 3,000 or 4,000 people under his command to attack the tall and solid Milan. Therefore, Ludovico Sforza asked Maximilian I to lend him some troops. Okay, I will lend you 4,000 soldiers to help you capture Milan. However, you have to change all these people's clothes into Italian clothes. And you must never tell others that they are my army, just say they are ordinary mercenaries. Maximilian I agreed to provide troops to help Lao Lu capture Milan. However, he did not want to openly tear his face with the French. So, Maximilian I asked Lao Lu to change the appearance of the army he lent him and make it Italian mercenaries. Okay, no problem. Your Majesty, I also want to borrow someone from you. Lao Lu hesitated to speak. Tell me, who do you want to borrow? Frundsberg. Ah. How could it be him? Maximilian I was a little surprised. Doesn't he know that the Marin phalanx? I'm going to fight the French here. The Spaniards just used the Marin phalanx to defeat the French, and I hope to defeat the French as well. But I really need this talent. Maximilian I was reluctant to part with him. It's okay, Your Majesty, I will return it to you after the war. I am short of a general now, so I need to borrow him temporarily. Also, it is said that he brought 2,500 East Frisian veterans. Can I? After saying that, old Lou laughed embarrassedly. Maximilian I thought about it and felt that defeating the French was the most important thing now. Moreover, it would be difficult to win with only the 3,000 or 4,000 Italian soldiers under Ludovico Sforza. So, Maximilian I gritted his teeth and planned to lend Frundsberg and his 2,500 East Frisian veterans to Old Lou first. Okay, I will lend it to you. However, you have to return it to me after the war. In addition, you have to ensure the safety of Frundsberg, he is an officer I value very much. Understood, understood. Hee. Old Lou, who got a great benefit, left happily. What made him happy was that he not only got the fierce general brother Frundsberg, but also borrowed the 2,500 brave men under his command. In this way, even if he encountered a large number of French troops, he would have the courage to confront them. Because the Marin Square of the 2,500 brave men was specifically designed to fight against the French. Chapter 199 I, Lou Hansan, am back again, Part 2, soon, the Emperor's order reached Frundsberg. Frundsberg said nothing and took his men to the Tellina Valley to meet Ludovico Sforza. However, before leaving, Frundsberg asked Maximilian I to prepare more horses for him, just draft horses. The reason for this was that Frundsberg wanted to learn from the battle in which Marin attacked the city of Oldenburg. As long as the action is fast enough, the enemy will not have time to react. Of course, the number of French troops in the Duchy of Milan is not large now. According to the intelligence of the Sforza family, there are only 3,000 French troops in Milan now. Moreover, 2,000 of them are Italian mercenaries. The real French army is only 1,000. Therefore, as long as our army can quickly reach Milan and find a way to open the city gate, the army in the city will be unable to resist. The worst result is that the gate of Milan is not opened and a stalemate with the defenders in the city occurs. In this way, the French have time to mobilize reinforcements. However, looking at the current situation, the French cannot withdraw reinforcements. Because they are in a bad situation on the Naples front and cannot split their troops. In addition, on the mountain road leading to Milan, the French also deployed an army of about 1,500 people to monitor the remnants of the Sforza family in the Turline Valley. Therefore, if you want to capture Milan, there are two main enemies. One is the 1,500 enemy troops lying across the marching route, the other is the gate of Milan. As for the 3,000 defenders in Milan, as long as the gate is broken, it will not be a problem. The reason why the 1,500 enemy troops on the mountain road south of the Turline Valley are considered a big enemy is because Frundsberg is afraid that the attack on these 1,500 people will be leaked and give an early warning to Milan. In that case, his sneak attack plan will be exposed. Therefore, he must first get rid of these 1,500 enemy troops. Then, when the road is open, he will lead the main force, mount the horses, and march all the way to Milan. However, unlike the attack on Oldenburg, the distance from the Tellina Valley to Milan is 160 kilometers. When Marin attacked Oldenburg, the distance was only 40 kilometers. Therefore, it is difficult to reach Milan at night for a night attack. If one person is alone, the marching distance in a day is at most 80 to 90 kilometers. If it is more, the horse will easily die. Therefore, after thinking again and again, Frundsberg decided to give all the 10,000 draft horses lent by the emperor and the horses owned by Ludovico Sforza to 5,000 elite soldiers, so that these elite soldiers can ride 2 horses each. In this way, without sparing physical strength, the whole army can march more than 120 kilometers in a day and night. Of course, 160 kilometers can also be run down. But if you do that, it will hurt the horses and it is easy for a batch of horses to die. And, most importantly, even if you run to Milan, the soldiers will not have the physical strength to fight. Therefore, Frundsberg's plan was to have 5,000 elite soldiers, each with 2 horses, run 120 kilometers on the first day, and then rest. On the second night, they would run another 40 kilometers, break into Milan at night, and kill the defenders in the city. In response, Frundsberg specially organized the army to practice night combat. As for the 2,500 people who followed him from East Frisia, night combat training was a basic training item, and being woken up by the emergency assembly whistle in the middle of the night was a normal experience. However, other armies were really bad at night combat training. Frundsberg selected 2,500 elite soldiers from other armies to follow his 2,500 men to conduct night combat training. As a result, the 2,500 newcomers were in a mess on the first day. If Frundsberg had not suppressed them with his men, perhaps these idiots would have blown up the camp. After many days of training, these people gradually adapted to marching and training in the middle of the night. At the same time, Ludovico Sforza was not idle either. According to the method learned from Marin, Frundsberg decided to send people to Milan to help the army open the city gate. For this reason, Frundsberg commissioned Ludovico Sforza to send people to Milan to prepare to open the city gate from the inside. The Sforza family has ruled Milan for decades and is deeply rooted there. Although it is impossible for the Sforza family to pull out tens of thousands of troops to fight the French now, it is still possible to find a group of thugs to open the city gate at night. Right now, the Sforza family still has many spies in Milan. However, now that the French are powerful, these people from the Sforza family are lurking, waiting for the day when Ludovico Sforza fights back. So when Frundsberg asked Ludovico Sforza to send people to lurk in Milan and help open the city gate, Lao Lu agreed without thinking. This is not a big deal for him. After all, the Sforza family's decades of rule over Milan was no joke. After more than 10 days of night battle training, which finally took effect, Frundsberg finally attacked. The first target was naturally Promedia's 1,500 French troops outside the Turline Valley. Of course, it was not right to say that they were French troops. Because those 1,500 people were Italian mercenaries hired by the French. Frundsberg had no doubts about defeating this army. The only thing he needed to pay attention to was to prevent Promedia's army from slipping through the net and running back to Milan to report the news. Therefore, before the action, Frundsberg sent out 200 cavalrymen to take a shortcut to Promedia's road to Milan, ready to intercept and kill any messengers. This move was learned by Frundsberg from Marin when attacking Emden. Intercepting the messenger can fully ensure that the news is not leaked. In this way, when the army attacks the next target, it will be a surprise. Even the couple of Edisades who escaped from the tunnel were stopped by the cavalry who killed the messenger. The effect was very good. On the night of October 29th, a local cavalry of 200 people, after receiving the order from Frundsberg, passed through the small road and went around to the west and south of Promedia town, ready to kill the escaped enemies and the messengers on horseback. At about 4 o'clock in the morning of October 30th, when it was almost dawn, the Italian mercenaries in the Promedia castle were the most sleepy. Even the sentries on the wall fell asleep. Taking this opportunity, Frundsberg decisively ordered his soldiers to quietly carry the ladder forward. Before the defenders reacted, dozens of people went up. Then, these dozens of people withstood the counterattack of the Italian mercenaries and defended this section of the city wall tightly. Then, more soldiers climbed up the city wall with ladders. After about 2 hours of fierce fighting, half of Promedio's 1,500 defenders were wiped out, and half chose to surrender. When the fierce fighting began, as expected, the city sent a messenger to the direction of Milan. However, it was easily stopped by 200 cavalrymen. This battle was unusually easy. The unlucky defenders, because the sentry fell asleep, allowed the attacking troops to easily control a section of the city wall. Then, the defenders were in tragedy. In this way, with only more than 30 casualties, the 5,000 soldiers led by Frundsberg easily dealt with the defenders. Of course, this was also because the defenders in the fortress were very sleepy. To attack them at this time was simply too bad for those defenders. After a day of rest, Frundsberg personally led 5,000 elite soldiers, 1 man and 2 horses, and set out on the road to attack Milan. Ludovico Sforza, with 3,000 troops, marched leisurely behind, waiting to go to Milan to receive the fruits of victory. After the first day of marching, Frundsberg chose to rest the army, and then scattered some cavalry and arrested all passers-by to prevent anyone from going to Milan to report the news and let the enemy prepare. Then, Frundsberg took the army to rest for a day. The next night, Frundsberg set out again with the army. At about 12 o'clock in the middle of the night, Frundsberg's army finally arrived at the west gate of Milan, which was the most laxly guarded. The west gate faced the direction of France, and of course the most laxly guarded. Soon after the birch whistle used for communication was blown, shouts of killing were heard in the city. Then, the west gate was opened by a group of injured Milan residents. They were all important followers of the Sforza family. Frundsberg had no time to greet these warriors, and he did not understand Italian. So, after letting the warriors who opened the gate make way, Frundsberg directly led 5,000 troops to swarm in and attack the palace in the city. At the same time, Frundsberg also divided 2,000 troops to control the other 3 gates. When it was dawn, the Italian mercenaries at the 4 gates were cleared out, and the 2 military camps in the city were also pulled out. However, the palace in Milan was extremely strong, and Frundsberg could not capture it for a long time. And the guards of the palace were 800 of the 1,000 French troops. Relying on the strong palace, the French army chose to resist stubbornly. Frundsberg was not in a hurry to capture the palace, but sent people to besiege the palace first, then took over the whole city, and sent troops to the countryside to take over the confiscated food. As long as the food was controlled, the French army would be out of food on the Naples front. As an officer who followed Marin very early, Frundsberg remembered that Marin often said, "Food and grass must go before the troops move." As long as the supply of food and grass from the Duchy of Milan to the French army is cut off, the morale of the French will inevitably be low, and even chaos will occur. Losing to Spain is almost a foregone conclusion. At that time, the Duchy of Milan only needs to prevent the fleeing French army from grabbing food. For this reason, Frundsberg decided to transport all the grain harvested in the Duchy of Milan in the autumn into the city. Then, when the French army fled through the Duchy of Milan, they would guard against it to prevent the French army from grabbing food. 3 days later, Ludovico Sforza finally arrived in Milan with the remaining 3,000 soldiers. Seeing the grand welcome ceremony organized by the diehards of the Sforza family, Duke Ludovico was very proud. Standing on the top of Milan, Ludovico Sforza shouted with high spirits, "Ludovico, Lu Han San, am back again. Chapter 200 The Mao Girl is here." When Luhan III, Duke Ludovico occupied the city of Milan, the French army on the front line was still in the dark. As Marin expected, the French army was waiting for a good harvest on the Lombardy plain. Then, the French army could mobilize military rations from the Duchy of Milan. Unfortunately, all this was destroyed by Luhan III. However, because of the backward transmission of information, the French did not know it for the time being. At the same time, the 10 bronze heavy cannons that Marin promised to Gonzalo were also delivered to Naples. However, this bronze cannon is too expensive. 1 cannon weighs more than 1 ton, and 10 cannons are more than 10 tons, and the total price is almost 1 ton of silver. What is the concept of 1 ton of silver? That's 23,400 gold coins. However, Gonzalo gritted his teeth and bought it. Although Marin had said that he could borrow it, Gonzalo believed that the Spanish army still needed heavy artillery in the siege. These 10 heavy artillery pieces are all 14-pound caliber and were specially designed for the Spaniards by the East Frisian cannon foundry. After the design was completed, the blacksmith was arranged to make the corresponding iron mold. Then, the bronze liquid can be cast directly according to the procedure. Iron mold casting of cannons is very fast. A set of molds can cast several bronze cannons a day. 10 bronze cannons were cast in 2 days. As for the style of the artillery, Marin decided to adopt the French artillery style and added gun ears, but Wang Shan did not add them. Moreover, he did not get an advanced 2-wheeled gun carriage. After all, Marin was not willing to give the best things to the Spaniards. In Marin's heart, Spain is also his competitor for the Americas. However, even so, the performance of these artillery pieces is sufficient. Moreover, there is no shortage of artillerymen who are good at aiming and shooting in the Spanish army. Because the Spanish army is also equipped with a lot of artillery, but they are all rear-loading François cannons. However, the aiming principle of artillery is still similar. It is also possible to let those artillerymen operate the Nashi heavy artillery. After getting the artillery, Gonzalo asked the artillerymen to practice using this heavy artillery while asking the blacksmith shop to step up the production of iron ball shells. After all, once the war starts, the artillery will not stop bombarding the city gates, and there is a great demand for iron ball shells. At this time, in the port of Kaffa in the Crimean Khanate, 20 ships of Mao may have been loaded. Art stood at the bow, waved enthusiastically and said goodbye to the equally enthusiastic robbers of the Crimean Khanate. By the way, after Art was detained in the Dardanelles on the west side of the Turkish Strait, the customs clearance documents he carried were sent to Istanbul. After comparing the letters of the Crimean Khanate, the Turkish Sultan Bayezid II found that it was indeed a document written by his ally Munkagayar Khan. Because he needed to use the army of the Crimean Khanate to suppress the Russians on the steppes of East Europe, Bayezid II was very tolerant of the Crimean Khanate. He himself is also a very tolerant sultan. For example, when the 2 kings of Spain expelled the Jews, it was Bayezid II who sent ships to Spain to accept the Jews one by one. As a monarch with vision, Bayezid II would naturally not offend Crimea, the thug. Therefore, Bayezid II not only agreed to the fleet's passage, but also signed a customs clearance document representing the official Ottoman Empire. In this way, the fleet will not have to take out the customs clearance document of the Crimean Khan when passing through the Turkish Straits in the future. However, Bayezid II is not a fool. Although a new customs clearance document was signed, the document also stipulates that the fleet size shall not exceed 20 ships. Moreover, it must be accompanied by Turkish warships and pass through the Istanbul Strait, the easternmost section of the Turkish Straits. Moreover, when the fleet passes, it must sail close to the Asian side and must not approach the Istanbul side. This regulation is also to prevent someone from attacking the Turkish capital Istanbul. After all, the city of Istanbul is on the European side of the Istanbul Strait. When passing through the strait, Bayezid II also enthusiastically sent a navigator to guide the fleet to the port of Kaffa on the Crimean Peninsula. At the same time, Bayezid II also asked the navigator to bring his own letter of condolences to Munkagayar Khan. When the fleet arrived at the port of Kaffa, Feodosia, it was warmly welcomed by the bearded men of the Crimean Khanate. Although these Tatar bearded men were all robbers and bandits, they were still very polite when facing customers who were willing to help sell the stolen goods. After all, these Crimean robbers may not be able to use the things they robbed. It would be a pity to leave those unnecessary property and slaves in their hands. Therefore, the Crimeans need a channel to sell the stolen goods and get rid of the unnecessary people and stolen goods. Therefore, the port of Kaffa was born. This time the attack on the Principality of Ryazan was so great that the Crimean Khanate could not bear it. Not to mention the piles of property, the Crimean Khanate robbed as many as 40,000 people in terms of population alone. Among them, there are 20,000 young Maomai. About half of the other 20,000 are boys and girls, and the remaining 10,000 are all young and strong men. However, in the slave market, the best sellers are young women and boys. Needless to say, young women, those Arab men have several women. However, there are not so many women in the Arab land alone. Therefore, buying from the Crimean Khanate has become an important source of women. Boys are also very popular, because boys under the age of 10 are taken back and trained for a few years, brainwashed and trained every day. After 10 years, these boys will be trained into elite warriors. The famous Sultan's personal soldiers came from this. Moreover, not only the Sultan has the habit of training personal soldiers, but those Turkish pashas, equivalent to provincial governors, also have the habit of training some such personal guards. Therefore, in the slave trade of the Crimean Khanate, women and boys are the main force and the most popular. The rest, girls, are second. The reason for this is that girls still need a few years to grow up. Those buyers, how can they wait for the girls to grow up? It is better to buy ready-made young women and take them home to vent their sexual desires. Of course, there are also perverts who like girls and buy girls directly to do that. The least popular are male slaves, including those teenagers. Most of the customers of the Crimean Khanate come from the Arab region, where the most taboo is the invasion of reproductive men into their homes. Therefore, male slaves are not very popular in the Arab region. Of course, there are exceptions. That is, Arabs like to castrate male slaves before they can let them go home with confidence. Historically, the process of selling black slaves began after the rise of the Arab Empire. However, the Arabs were cruel and ruthless. They castrated the black male slaves directly after catching them. In this way, these male black slaves would not be able to cuckold Arab men. Moreover, African men have a lively personality, but after castration, their personalities become docile and honest. After all, if the body does not secrete too many hormones, what can be done if they are not honest? During the Tang dynasty, Arab merchants once sold black slaves to China, called Kunlun slaves. These Kunlun slaves were actually basically castrated black men. Because of castration, these black slaves were honest and obedient, and had no desires or demands, and were very popular with the nobles of the Tang dynasty. In addition, the Tang dynasty was open-minded and women were also bold. If these strong Kunlun slaves had not been castrated, many bold women of the Tang dynasty might have left black cubs. However, there is obviously no such record in history, because those Kunlun slaves were basically castrated, so it was safe to put them in the back house. Art brought 20 galleys, all of which were over 200 tons. However, each ship could carry a maximum of 120 women. So, the entire fleet could buy 2,400 women at a time. The Crimeans were obviously not happy about this. You know, there were 40,000 people in their slave camp. How many trips would it take to transport 2,400 women? And those 40,000 slaves there would consume a lot of food every day. Arte had no choice but to do it this way for now. It seemed that in order to promote the male slaves who were difficult to sell, the official of the Crimean Khanate said to Arte, "Mr. Arte, do you want to buy some young and strong male slaves to take back? They are very capable and cheap." Arte looked at the hairy Russian men and was very unhappy. "Haji, my ship is loaded with women. These women are all shipped back to be wives. What if these grandsons sleep with those girls on the ship if I bring these hairy men with me? Let our brothers in our country be the scapegoats." After hanging out with Marin for a long time, Arte also learned the word scapegoat. "Hey, Lord Arte, don't worry about this. Just wait and see." After that, the Crimean official named Haji found several veterinarians. "What are you doing?" Arte was a little confused. "Lord Art, aren't you worried that these Russian men will sleep with the women on the boat? We are here to solve the problem for you." "How to solve it?" Art was a little confused. "Of course, castrate them. The brothers I invited are all good at castrating horses, cattle and sheep, and are famous veterinarians, so you can rest assured. Moreover, these Russian male slaves are our gifts to you." While talking, there were bursts of screams from the other side. "Well, it's okay, Lord Art, these men will no longer be able to harm the girls on the boat. However, they have to rest for a few months before they can work," Hadji said calmly, as if he had done something insignificant. Art was stunned, and it took him a long time to come back to his senses. Looking at the few Russian hairy men who were still bleeding below, he asked Hadji, "Don't you treat their wounds? Just treat them casually." Art learned first aid knowledge from Marin, so he naturally knew that wounds needed to be disinfected. Even the fleet usually prepared a lot of alcohol and gauze to prevent sailors from getting hurt. This. I don't understand. Our veterinarians have always been so rough. Is there anything special about this? Art looked at the Russian hairy men who were still howling miserably, and felt a little bit reluctant. So he went back to the cabin, took back the medical alcohol and gauze, and asked the doctor on board to help the miserable hairy men deal with the wounds below. Looking at the actions of the doctor on board, Hadji was a little surprised. "Lord Art, what are your men doing?" "Disinfection. If they are not disinfected, the probability of these people dying is very high. And if they are disinfected, they have a 90% chance of surviving." "What? 90%? Hadji jumped up suddenly. "For the Crimean Khanate, this is definitely a world-shaking event." "Why do you say that?" "The Crimean Khanate captured men from various Russian countries as slaves, and they must be castrated before they can be sold. However, in this era, because there were no disinfection measures, and the Crimean Khanate used barbaric veterinarians to help castrate. This also resulted in the castrated Russian male slaves having a survival rate of just over half. After all, humans are not as durable as animals. That is to say, of the tens of thousands of male slaves captured from Ryazan this time, only 5 or 6,000 can survive after castration. If the method that Art said can allow 90% of the castrated male slaves to survive, it will bring huge benefits to the Crimean Khanate. Because castrated Russian male slaves are also quite popular. One more person alive means a few more gold coins." Just like that, after learning the disinfection methods from Art's onboard doctor, Hadji let Art's fleet leave. 20 paddle boats loaded with 2,400 beautiful Russian girls personally selected by Art sailed westward towards the Strait of Gibraltar.